So can you see this background behind me?
Yeah.
Okay. So it looks like it might be somewhere in the Alps. Maybe. Maybe you could call it an Alp. Somewhere very green and alpine looking. And some people might say impressive, spectacular, huge. Other large adjectives like that. But if there's no one looking, there's really no words. So this was out in the backyard earlier, just out there, just there, without any words about any of it. Plants were growing, birds were feeding, there were some squirrels squirreling. These are just more words. For what's there, or what's just there. And even that might be too many words. Or too many thoughts. So if there aren't any thoughts, nothing's there in terms of words. Nothing's even there in terms of awareness or consciousness or us. Nothing's even looking. It's just what's there. It's just what is. It's just it. It's just this. And even when the words stop and the thoughts stop and the awareness stops and there's no you anywhere, there's still just all there is. In this case, an Alp with clouds and a background of more Alps. Just more words that really don't do anything. To what's already there, to all there, to all there apparently is there, including this. It's just there. And everything that's there is just doing what it is apparently doing. Namelessly, wordlessly, completely, fully, being. With no needs for words at all. The only one that needs or seems to need words is the one who won't shut up. The one that thinks it's there, that thinks it exists, that thinks it is. Until it's seen that it's not, and it never was. It was just thought thinking itself into existence completely, as much as it was able, including its own feeling of itself. You know, the feeling here was the feeling of Steve. The feeling there is the feeling of Dave. Dave knows what it feels like to be Dave, right? Now, here, there's not even a sense of being. No sense of an observer or a doer or a thinker. Or a beer. It's just all everything. In a sense, it's nothing. And the nothing is very much something. But the something is very much nothing. As far as words go, and as far as any kind of doer goes. Because when the doer goes, there's nothing. There's no doer. There's just nothing. And that nothing is something. It's really something. So what's David's experience with nothing these days?
Yeah. I guess most recently, there was just a lot of thinking about, I guess, the nature of thought. And there was some journaling about it. And what seemed to come out was that if there isn't a self doing the thinking, or if thinking doesn't really capture what is, and it can't be approached with understanding, then any understanding is I guess falling short, or it's something to be held on to, an object for me to think, I got this, or I know what's being said. It's like anytime there's one of those kind of sentiments, it's just being seen that that's kind of artificial. Any understanding is artificial because it just belongs to me in a way. And then, so then there's just been this kind of a feeling of like being backed into a corner with like trying to get this, but realizing any attempt that goes out to get this is just going to be an attempt that's not going to bring back anything except for more knowledge, more understanding, which is not nothing. As if what's being talked about is nothing, then an understanding isn't nothing. Like that's something. And so it just seems like the seeking kind of energy for getting something out of it. It seems to just be becoming more obvious that that's fruitless. To try to get something, and yet there's still a movement of thought to try to wrap up some concept or idea that's spoken about, to try to hold on to something. But it's like it's all of that conceptual stuff is just becoming more slippery. Like there's nothing to really hold on to because it's just more words and understanding. So it's kind of like what you were just saying about without the words, nothing can be said. But somehow that doesn't seem like enough for that energy that wants something else or something more.
That's what it knows. It's what it's always done. That's all it knows how to do. That's why it'll never see what is. Because all it knows to do is what it's always done. And it just keeps going in circles in different ways, in different forms, attempting to continue its existence because that's all it knows. It is the knower. It thrives on knowing, and that knowing makes it impossible for it to see nothing. And it hides in the smallest recesses of itself, as if attempting to be nothing, or attempting to diminish itself, or disappear. And even in the smallest or the quietest expression of itself, it's still there. Even in the quietest meditation, the tiniest awareness, the minutest bit of consciousness, it's still there, attempting to be, or hoping to be, until it's not. And then there's nothing. Then nothing is seen by nothing. And nothing sees itself as quite something, being nothing.
Yeah, it seems like when you were just saying there, something was becoming, I don't know, something just popping up for me, that subtle, quiet sense of knowing, like even knowing that further knowing or understanding or experience doesn't lead to getting this, getting nothing, seeing nothing. So even knowing that there is no knowing, there's still that sense of knowing. That's essentially what the I is, or what I am, is that sense of knowing.
Yes.
And so there's nothing, I mean, it's all like more knowing is just food for that sense of knowing, keeping it going.
Yes.
And then it's like the real hopelessness of that situation. It's like, what can knowing do to not know? And it's like, well, nothing, obviously. It just does it. That's just all it does. It just continues knowing and breaking the world down into pieces to digest it, concepts and labeling. And like that seems to be clear. And then that still that sense of clearness, it seems to be tied to that sense of knowing, like the same thing, I guess.
Yes. It's just another expression of of itself, endless expressions of itself, different forms, different sizes, until it's no longer there in any form. Without even trying.
Now, the real flatliner that I've heard and that a lot of speakers mention is that it's already not happening. It's already not there.
Yes,
That sense of knowing is artificial. And yet for me, it seems to be the only thing that exists is that sense of knowing.
that is the you sensing its own existence in different ways, because that's all it knows to do. Until it doesn't do it, until it stops doing it. And it's not even doing it. It just thinks it is. It is this doing all the thinking just because it can. And when it's not there, then it's seen that it never was. By no one and nothing. It's just seen. Never to return. It doesn't make the decision. There's talk about the you giving up or just giving up on itself. That's part of the story. That's expressed in different ways after it's seen. That it was never there to begin with. It was just an idea. that thought it was a person. Until it wasn't. And then after it wasn't, it's seen it was never there anyway. So it's the one that is desperate to continue thinking itself up in whatever form it's focusing on, not realizing that it already is nothing in the deepest sense of nothing being something. It got stuck. It just got stuck being a you. And it can't figure out it can't find its way out of being a you. It's beyond its capability to stop being a you there's no hope for it to stop being a you, yet it persists because it's all it knows. It's all it is. Even when, as people say, it never was. It already isn't, and it never was. It's a thought process. It's a dream state. It's it is somehow the expression of life in terms of life expressing itself that way in a dream. And at the same time, it's separate. It's like life separating itself from itself. Just as life can see itself when nothing is there, nothing sees itself as nothing and sees the something in the nothing.
Seems like there's always a wanting to skip the step, which isn't a step, I guess, but it's said that there's the dying of that sense, and then it's seen that it never was. But the only thing that the mind can try to do, the only thing it knows how to do, is to try to see that and understand that, see that it's not there, see that there's no one. And it seems like it wants to get to that, what sounds like an understanding. Because for the mind, like hearing you speak or a speaker talk about it, it has to sound like there's somebody there who knows this. And it sounds like a knowing. And so that becomes attractive for that which thinks it knows itself and everything else. And it wants to get there. But all that's being said over and over again is that dies, and then it's seen that it never was.
Yes.
And there's that insatiable desire to see that it never was.
Yes.
While it's still being. And that its own existence is the thing that seems to be blocking that nothing, that seeing nothing.
Yes.
And so there's this constant chasing of the tail and different forms of inquiry into, is there someone here right now? Oh, there has to be, because he's asking that question, looking for that, looking for nothing, trying to confirm that there's nothing seeing. It's like it's the only direction the mind can go is into seeing it for itself, understanding it for itself, turning it into an object, something that has to be found through looking, even though it's said that it's obvious when it's obvious. But when it's, and that obviousness is not the result of looking hard enough. Yet the mind will turn this into, oh, it's so complex and it requires looking for who's looking, and it seems to require all this effort. But when it's really being communicated, it's saying that it's effortless already. Like that looking, the motivation for the looking is effortless, but that can't be seen. It's too quick, immediate. And so then there's that tiring feeling of looking and knowing that if anything's found, it's just more understanding, it's more knowing. It's like knowing can't unknow itself. Like you said, it's not within its capability to see that it's not seeing, because that's like a paradox, It seems to exist in that paradox of the whole trying to see the whole from a separate perspective.
Yes.
So yeah, hopeless is the word that comes up over and over again for me. Just anytime there's that seeking energy starting up and looking, I mean, it seems to be tiring itself out faster and faster when there's a noticing of, oh, there's looking again, there's trying to understand again, and it just doesn't have the fuel to keep going as far up those lines of inquiry or voyages into the understanding world. It seems like it just doesn't have the juice to keep going into more knowing. I would say that, and yet there's still a knowing of that,
Yes.
and that's
Yes.
unavoidable.
Yes, it will continue knowing until it doesn't know.
Yeah.
It's good at hiding itself in in looking, in awareness, in and then even in not looking, in not thinking, in not in no thought. What is there when there's no thought of any kind? No thought, even in terms of a sensation of being. Even in terms of observing, even in terms of the smallest form or sense of being. What is there when there's none of that? When there's just none of that at all.
All I could think of with that is I wouldn't know.
Is what?
Is that I wouldn't know.
And I wouldn't know?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know what that would be like because all I know is that sense of being and of thought.
Yeah.
Of being the thinker. So to imagine, like it's unimaginable because it doesn't fit any experience that I've had.
Yes.
Because it's what sounds like you're talking about is the end of experience, which can't be imagined.
So what is there, what is left when there's none, there is no longer any imagination, no longer any expression, no longer any looking, no longer any sense of David, not the slightest bit of consciousness. What could possibly be left?
Nothing.
Yeah, you got it. Nothing. Just nothing. How's that sound?
Yeah, this if only I could stop the knowing and the sense of being here and imagining, you know.
Yeah, all of that is thought. All of it is a form of thought. The thought self. The thought self of David. And when all of that stops, when all thought stops of any kind, There's just nothing. Wonderful nothing. The kind of nothing that's pregnant with everything. The kind of nothing that is filled with aliveness. That's a popular term. The nothing that's somehow vibrant in some way, creative in some way, endless, and yet it's all really beyond description. It's filled to the brim with fullness. At the same time, it's empty. It's empty in the sense of its nothingness. It's filled to the brim with somethingness. It just it's just there when there's nothing. It's just there when there's no thought, when there's no Dave. What happens when Dave has a glimpse?
Hard to say. Like I talked to you before about, there's just this sense of intimacy that the body is being breathed and the thoughts are just thoughting themselves. And there's this kind of in and out sense of here-ness, because that here-ness seems like it's tied to that thoughting. And so there's this kind of meaning and being that I've heard of, I guess. And yeah, there just seems like there's everything happening to nothing or to no one. And then right away that's tried to, seems like it's tried to be held on to, but that understanding is something to know. But then at the same moment, it's just the thoughting itself with a new understanding. During the glimpse, it seems like that's just all automatic. And then as soon as it's over, there's a claiming that I had a glimpse. And they're, they become more hopeless in a sense, because every time that the me survives the glimpse, it's left with this hopelessness, but it's the kind of one eye open kind of hopelessness, where it's like there's nothing that the mind can do to undo itself. There's nothing knowing can do to stop knowing. But then there's the hearing that there could be no Dave, no sense of here, no doership. That seems to happen for no reason when it ends. So there's this Hail Mary kind of hope that, like, well, maybe that'll happen. but there's nothing that leads to it, nothing that can be done to get there. And it isn't there because it's already not happening, which is just can't be understood or even approached by the mind, because it's like, what do you do with that? So it's hopeless and hope at the same time. That's usually what happens after a glimpse.
So,
It's kind of both.
so does Dave try to have glimpses?
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've tried to figure out, what triggers them. Nothing seemingly triggers them. They're just random, and they're always, pretty short, 5 minutes maybe. And there's just a scrambling, kind of like being pulled down a hallway back to reality. What seems like reality for me, for David. Trying to hold on to that glimpse seems to be something that wants to hold on to. And when it's over, it just seems like it's a blessing and a curse, because they can be so relaxing while they're happening, and then afterward there's this kind of slamming back into being here and feeling like I'm directing the thoughts again. And even though it was obvious that nothing was doing any of it, there's the unshakable feeling of being here, doing it all, that seems to come back, and there's just a return to this kind of hopelessness of like, well, there's nothing I can know further to trigger that to happen, or nothing to hold on to that isn't a concept or an idea. There's nothing to stop all that thoughting from happening either.
Well, nothing is doing something. Nothing is doing something. There's something happening with the nothing.
Yeah, it sucks.
Well, there's only this experience to speak from. And in this case, it took this, what it took for Steve to stop. It took in this case, it took a bunch of meetings, condensed meetings before Steve finally left. So from this perspective, it doesn't seem like it would have happened any other way. It seemed like that was the way it needed to happen. Anyway, that's the way it did happen. That's the way it happened. That's the story. The way it did happen. And at the same time, it seemed that Steve was never there in the first place. So that there was a bunch of effort for Steve at some point, and then things changed. And there seemed to be in the story, there seemed to be a kind of progression as the story transpired, where Steve apparently got worn out to the point where he just left without even deciding. There was like no, he was getting tired, he was getting smaller, the inner voice was getting smaller all along. And at one point he was there, at one point he was no longer there. The story could include that, well, Steve just got so worn out, he just decided to leave. Who knows? But at one point, he was progressively seeming to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And going to all these meetings, the meetings aren't even remembered hardly. The words that were said during the meetings are hardly remembered at all. It was just like the effort of doing the meetings and showing up, and there was like a month between the two retreats, where there were still, in that month, there were still glimpses happening. But Steve was continuing to kind of somehow get smaller, to become less Steve. Until one day he was there, the next moment he wasn't. He never came back. Now there's just nothing. Wonderful nothing. So that's what happened here. And it seems like there's a lot of different ways that this energy changes. The only thing that seems clear here in general is the more one is immersed in the environment of meetings, or the environment of talking, the more there seems to be a change in the energy.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
It feels like that.
There's a lot to be said for the environment